Hello, class. So today we're just going to be focusing specifically on chapter 13 of Beloved. Um, this chapter I called The Spell is Broken, and this chapter is written from Paul D's point of view. So Paul D considers what it means to be a man. We see him opening up the chapter considering different perceptions of manhood and masculinity, especially as it relates to African American men during the time of slavery. Paul D determines that he must tell Setha about his affair with Beloved. But when he starts the conversation, Setha's look that she gives him, which was basically a look ready to accept, release, or excuse him, swayed him to say that he wants her pregnant. Setha's response, she says she's too old for that, and she laughs off his request. And the next images we see are of Setha and Paul D, walking home really as a couple. They feel very carefree and happy. And I think that's in response to this unspoken commitment that they have made to each other just by Paul D asking this question about wanting to start a family with her. When Setha, Denver, Beloved, and Paul D eat dinner that night, Setha asks if Paul D will continue to sleep in the cold house, and she tells him to come upstairs where he belongs and to stay there. So this ultimately breaks Beloved's spell over Paul D, and Paul D feels grateful towards Setha, which he realizes it's the second time in his life that he's ever been grateful to a woman. So that's pretty much everything that happens in that chapter. And I do want you guys to do a writing prompt today. So on the next slide, I've taken a section of chapter 13, and this is a section I want you to look closely at. So the following passage, which opens the chapter, depicts Paul D reflecting on what it means to be a man. So throughout his reflection, he considers the various things that compromise or uphold manhood. So what I want you to do is to please write a 2 to 3 paragraph response to this passage, focusing on Paul D's exploration of masculinity and manhood. In Paul D's reality, how is manhood defined and by whom? And what are those things that compromise Paul D's manhood? Also consider the question Paul D asks Setha about wanting her pregnant. How does this play into the discussion of masculinity? So please use direct quotes from the passage, as always, or from the novel to support your response. There's other areas in the novel that we've read so far that have also kind of looked at Paul D as a man, where, he's the one to quote unquote save the girls from Beloved. And we kind of see his masculinity being a little bit compromised as we're continuing to go through the novel. So please attempt to include a thesis statement and transitional topic sentences between your paragraphs. So this is the selection, and I'll read that to you. The last of the Sweet Home men, so named and called by one who would know, believed it. The other 4 believed it too once, but they were long gone. The sold one never returned, the lost one never found. One he knew was dead for sure, one he hoped was, because butter and clabber was no life or reason to live it. He grew up thinking that of all the blacks in Kentucky, only the 5 of them were men. Allowed, encouraged to correct Garner, even defy him, to invent ways of doing things, to see what was needed and attack it without permission, to buy a mother, choose a horse or a wife, handle guns, even learn reading if they wanted to. But they didn't want to, since nothing important to them could ever be put down on paper. Was that it? Is that where the manhood lay? In the naming done by a white man who was supposed to know? Who gave them the privilege not of working, but of deciding how to? No. In their relationship with Garner was true metal. They were believed and trusted, but most of all, they were listened to. He thought what they said had merit, and what they felt was serious. Deferring to his slave's opinion did not deprive him of authority or power. It was school teacher who taught them otherwise. A truth that waved like a scarecrow in rye. They were only sweet home men at sweet home. One step off that ground and they were trespassers among the human race, watchdogs without teeth, steer bulls without horn, gelded workhorses whose neigh and whinny could be translated into a language responsible humans spoke. His strength had lain in knowing that schoolteacher was wrong. Now he wondered. There was Alfred, Georgia, there was Delaware, there was Sixo, and still he wondered. If schoolteacher was right, it explained how he had come to be a rag doll, picked up and put back down anywhere, anytime by a girl young enough to be his daughter, effing her when he was convinced he didn't want to. Whenever she turned her behind up, the calves of his youth, was that it? Cracked his resolve. But it was more than appetite that humiliated him and made him wonder if schoolteacher was right. It was being moved, placed where she wanted him. And there was nothing he was able to do about it. For his life, he could not walk up the glistening white stairs in the evening. For his life, he could not stay in the kitchen, in the keeping room, in the storeroom at night. And he tried, held his breath the way he had when he ducked into the mud, steeled his heart the way he had when the trembling began. But it was worse than that, worse than the blood eddy he had controlled with a sledgehammer. When he stood up from the supper table at 124 and turned toward the stairs, nausea was first, then repulsion. He who had eaten raw meat barely dead, who under plum trees bursted with blossoms had crunched through a dove's breast before its heart stopped beating. Because he was a man and a man could do what he would, be still for 6 hours in a dry well while night dropped, fight raccoon with his hands and win. Watch another man, whom he loved better than his brothers, roast without a tear, just so the roasters would know what a man was like. And it was he, that man, who had walked from Georgia to Delaware, who could not go or stay put where he wanted to in 124. Shame. So here we see Paul D. reflecting upon when he was a man, but then he considers who was this person that gave him this identity of manhood. It was the very person that enslaved him. So we can see a conflict there. But then we also see how schoolteacher forcefully took away this idea of manhood. And we see again how these slaves and Paul D are aligned with animals. Steer bulls without horns, gelded workhorses, watchdogs without teeth. Okay, so the very things that make them powerful are taken away from them, okay, because a bull is not a bull without its horns. A watchdog is powerless without its teeth. And so then we see him going on and considering, what is happening to him when he's with beloved. And then again, he thinks about what happened when he was on the run and how, again, he kind of turned into an animal. He was eating these birds that were not dead, fighting raccoons. So I want you to think about how masculinity is being portrayed in this particular passage, and then and write about that, and then maybe also think about some other aspects of the chapter that could play into your response. Okay?